Lee Marvin, the rugged, steel-eyed actor of Hollywood's golden era, was more than just a screen tough guy. Before the fame, he was a real soldier who bled on the battlefields of Saipan during World War II. Known for his blunt honesty, Marvin had no patience for hypocrisy, pretension, or carefully polished Hollywood myths. As his life drew to a close, Marvin made a revelation that stunned everyone around him. In private conversations and later interviews, he disclosed a shocking personal list: 7 legendary Hollywood figures he considered the most ruthless and morally compromised of the industry's golden age. Among these names were actors who built public images of heroism and loyalty, only to live drastically different lives behind the scenes. One became America's heroic symbol on screen while working to avoid real war service. Another bragged openly about sleeping with over 1,000 women, treating them as disposable. There was also a beloved star who preached loyalty, but lived a life of infidelity and pressured a mistress into a secret, illegal abortion. Why did Marvin hold these grudges for so long? And why did he wait until near the end of his life to speak so openly? To understand, we start with the man whose very image enraged him more than almost anyone else: John Wayne. The 1940s were a time when the United States was fully engulfed in the Second World War. Across the country, newspapers showed photographs of young men lining up in cities like New York and Los Angeles to enlist. Hollywood, too, stepped up. James Stewart gave up his fame to fly bomber planes for the U.S. Air Force. Clark Gable volunteered after the tragic death of his wife, Carol Lombard, during a military fundraising flight. Henry Fonda put on a Navy uniform and left the studio lights behind to serve. But while many Hollywood stars answered the call, John Wayne chose a different route. He actively avoided military service, finding every loophole he could. According to documents published by the Los Angeles Times in 1943, Wayne filed multiple deferment requests, citing family hardship and the uninterrupted need for his acting career. Behind the scenes, Republic Pictures, the studio that held his contract, reportedly lobbied hard to keep their money-making star out of the draft. Harold Stone, a former assistant producer, later described seeing a blunt fax sent to the War Department that read, "If John Wayne is drafted, the studio will lose millions of dollars." What enraged both veterans and the public wasn't just that Wayne didn't serve, it was how he used the war as a stage to elevate his personal image. While real soldiers were in the muddy trenches of Normandy or the sweltering jungles of the Pacific, Wayne was back home signing lucrative film deals. His breakthrough in Stagecoach had already made him famous. But war-themed films like Flying Tigers, 1942, and Back to Bataan, 1945, cemented him as America's on-screen war hero, despite the fact that he never set foot on a battlefield. For Lee Marvin, who had been shot and nearly killed at Saipan, this was unforgivable. In a 1965 interview with the New York Times journalist Michael O'Connor, Marvin didn't hold back. "I saw Wayne in uniform on screen and boiled inside. I lay in a Navy hospital for over a year with a bullet through me while he became the nation's hero. A man like that I can't respect." But Wayne's controversies didn't end with his draft dodging. In the 1960s, as the civil rights and anti-war movements grew louder, Wayne took a hardline stance with the far right, alienating many of his peers. In a notorious 1971 Playboy interview, he declared that Native Americans had failed to hold onto their land, so whites had the right to take it. He also said he didn't believe African Americans were ready to be treated as equals. These statements caused a storm of backlash across Hollywood and beyond. On film sets, Wayne was just as divisive. In 1956, during the shooting of The Searchers, Mexican actress Dolores Del Rio revealed that Wayne frequently mocked her heritage using offensive slurs. Richard Schickel, a respected critic at Time magazine, later wrote that Wayne often pressured young actresses into signing restrictive contracts, threatening to have their roles cut if they didn't comply. Perhaps the most disturbing episode came during the making of The Conqueror, 1956. Despite warnings about the dangers of filming near a nuclear testing site in Utah, Wayne insisted on proceeding. Later, dozens of cast and crew members developed cancer, including Wayne himself. Many believed he had known the risks, but stayed silent to protect the film's production. From avoiding service and profiting off wartime patriotism to racist comments and reckless decisions, John Wayne's real life painted a far different picture than the noble hero he portrayed on screen. To Lee Marvin, Wayne represented the ultimate Hollywood hypocrite, a man who wore the costume of a warrior without ever earning it in real life, glorifying himself at the expense of others. As the 1940s came to a close and America emerged from the shadows of World War II, a new kind of frenzy swept across the nation, a musical storm led by Frank Sinatra. With his silky voice, piercing blue eyes, and effortless charm, Sinatra made young women across New York, Chicago, and beyond scream and faint at his concerts. Newspapers called it the Sinatra craze, but behind the smooth voice and dashing suits was a darker world, one that connected directly to the Italian-American mafia. Sinatra wasn't just Hollywood's darling crooner, he was also a prized figure for some of America's most powerful mobsters, who used his fame to launder money, smuggle goods, and influence Hollywood deals. Sinatra maintained close relationships with infamous crime bosses like Lucky Luciano, Sam Giancana, and Carlo Gambino. At the time, Las Vegas was transforming into the glittering gambling capital of the world, and the mob needed a glamorous figure to lure middle-class Americans into their newly funded hotels and casinos. Sinatra, with his charm and celebrity status, was the perfect frontman. Through his legendary performances at venues like the Sands Hotel and the Tropicana, millions of dollars flowed in and out of mafia accounts. A 1977 declassified FBI report later revealed the shocking details. After his shows, Sinatra was frequently handed envelopes stuffed with cash, which were then funneled directly into Giancana's criminal operations. And Sinatra wasn't just a bystander. In 1952, Italian police intercepted suitcases full of contraband flown aboard Sinatra's private jet, which were falsely labeled musical instruments. A young singer named Joey Russo, caught up in the operation, was arrested, and his career destroyed. Sinatra, however, walked away untouched, protected by a fake diplomatic pass arranged by mafia lawyers. Russo vanished from the music scene while Sinatra carried on, performing at Madison Square Garden as if nothing had happened. His personal life was no less turbulent. His marriage to Ava Gardner, and one of Hollywood's most glamorous couples at the time, was riddled with violence and jealousy. In 1953 at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Sinatra flew into a rage after seeing Gardner casually talking with director John Huston. He hurled a bottle against the wall and shouted threats. A waiter later told the Los Angeles Herald, Examiner, that Ava was in tears while Frank screamed that he would ruin the career of anyone who tried to take her away. Gardner would later write in her diary that she lived in constant fear of his violent temper, and she wasn't the only one affected. In 1964, journalist Shirley D'Angelo published a cryptic piece in Variety suggesting that Sinatra had pressured a young actress, a promising MGM starlet, into an illegal abortion. Her identity was never revealed, but after the incident, she disappeared from Hollywood completely. Sinatra's explosive personality extended beyond romantic relationships. He frequently clashed with the press. In 1957, at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, he slapped a Miami Herald reporter who dared to ask him about his rumored mob connections. Although the story was initially reported, it was quickly buried under mob pressure. Even in professional settings, Sinatra's behavior made him notoriously difficult to work with. He often arrived late, left sets early, and forced entire crews to adjust to his whims. Many of his colleagues avoided him, not because of a lack of talent, but because he disrupted productions and treated others as though they were beneath him. Lee Marvin, who valued discipline and respect, had little patience for this. At a 1966 Palm Springs party, Sinatra arrived almost 2 hours late, stayed for 15 minutes, then left without explanation. Marvin, disgusted, turned to a friend and muttered, "He lives off the shadows behind him, not his voice. A man like that I'll never respect." To Marvin, Sinatra was the embodiment of arrogance protected by power, a man who could get away with anything because of his connections, talent, and influence. His story exposed a hidden truth about Hollywood's golden age. It wasn't just built on talent and glamour, but also on mafia money, intimidation, and silent victims. Sinatra's voice may have enchanted millions, but behind that smooth sound lay a web of criminal ties, violence, and fear that Lee Marvin never forgot. By the early 1950s, Hollywood was searching for a new heartthrob, someone who could match the rebellious intensity of Marlon Brando and James Dean, but with the polished charm that studios could market to the masses. Into the spotlight stepped Tony Curtis. With his striking good looks, athletic physique, and charismatic smile, Curtis became the industry's golden prince almost overnight. The press adored him, the studios pushed him into the limelight, and magazines called him the charmer of every gaze. But behind that picture-perfect image was a man living a chaotic, scandal-filled life, a life that Lee Marvin once scornfully described as that of a walking doll, all surface and no soul. Curtis bragged openly that he had slept with over 1,000 women, treating his romantic escapades like trophies. His relationships ranged from glamorous A-list stars to unknown young women, often leaving broken hearts and reputations in his wake. His marriage to Janet Leigh was initially seen as a Hollywood fairy tale. Together, they appeared on the covers of Life magazine, embodying the glamorous couple every fan dreamed of. But behind the scenes, their relationship was crumbling under Curtis's constant infidelities. In 1960, while filming Spartacus, Curtis was caught in an affair with Christine Kaufman, a young actress nearly 20 years his junior. The scandal exploded publicly, and 2 years later, his marriage to Janet Leigh ended. Curtis then married Christine Kaufman in 1963, when she was just 18 years old. Despite widespread public criticism, the union went ahead, and the New York Times famously labeled it the most shocking Hollywood marriage of the 1960s. Their marriage was brief. Christine left him not long after, taking their 2 children with her, but Curtis's behavior didn't change. His third wife, actress Leslie Allen, also eventually walked away, citing his incorrigible affairs. By the 1970s, Curtis's reputation was deeply tainted by rumors that he traded acting roles for sexual favors, taking advantage of young aspiring actresses. One of the most disturbing incidents occurred in 1982 in Las Vegas, when the Chicago Tribune reported that Curtis had been involved with an 18-year-old actress while he was in his 50s. Public outrage followed, but Curtis faced no real consequences. Protected by powerful lawyers and Hollywood's tendency to shield its moneymakers, the young woman disappeared from the industry shortly after. Curtis also fell into a downward spiral of alcohol and drug use. Throughout the 1970s, he became a regular figure on the Sunset Strip, indulging in the wild party scene of the disco era. In 1974, the production of Lepka was halted for 3 days after Curtis vanished on a drunken binge in New York. A crew member told the Los Angeles Times that when he finally returned to set, he was disheveled, weak, and forgetting his lines, a shadow of the charming star he once was. Despite these growing problems, studios continued to protect him as long as he filled cinema seats. But time eventually caught up. Later in life, Curtis developed chronic lung disease, and images of him in Las Vegas showed a frail man, oxygen tank in hand, bearing little resemblance to the once golden idol. Yet even in those years, tabloids reported that he continued to pursue much younger women, further damaging his legacy. Lee Marvin, who valued discipline and authenticity, had no respect for this kind of showmanship. At a Beverly Hills party, when Curtis began loudly boasting about his romantic conquests, Marvin shot him a cold look and muttered to a friend, "He's just a product of Hollywood's shiny outside, empty inside." The tension between them eventually boiled over. In 1968, at a charity event, Curtis arrived drunk and late, forcing delays and drawing the ire of the crowd. Marvin, disgusted, walked out and later told Variety, "I can't share a stage with someone who treats the audience like a joke." To Marvin, Tony Curtis represented the decay of Hollywood's values, a man whose good looks masked infidelity, whose addictions were excused, and whose talent was overshadowed by his reckless behavior. Curtis's career may have been glittering on the surface, but underneath was a hollow story of excess, broken promises, and self-indulgence. One of the most notorious clashes in 1960s Hollywood didn't happen on a movie set, but at a glamorous charity gala in Los Angeles in 1964, an event dedicated to honoring World War II veterans. Among the many stars attending was Lee Marvin, a decorated former Marine who had bled on the sands of Saipan and was invited to speak about sacrifice. Just as Marvin prepared to take the stage, Yul Brynner, the bald, charismatic star of The King and I and The Magnificent Seven, abruptly grabbed the microphone and began promoting his upcoming film. The atmosphere froze. Marvin slammed his glass down in fury, and the entire hall fell silent. The next day, the Los Angeles Times plastered the story with the headline, "Marvin and Brynner, 2 stars. One stage, one explosion." From that moment on, the hostility between the two men was no longer gossip, but an industry legend. Within Hollywood, Yul Brynner was infamous for his obsession with control and dominance. On the set of The Magnificent Seven, 1960, he repeatedly demanded that director John Sturges adjust scenes so that he remained the visual focus. His co-star Steve McQueen, known for his subtle but magnetic on-screen presence, unintentionally stole scenes simply by moving in the background. Brynner was reportedly furious. According to later accounts, he began spreading damaging rumors about McQueen's personal life and wild behavior, hoping to undermine his rising popularity. Actor Richard Harris also claimed that Brynner fabricated stories to sabotage his chances for major roles, leaving him humiliated and pushed aside. Brynner's private life mirrored his need for control. In 1961, he was spotted in Paris with both Marlene Dietrich, the legendary German actress, and a much younger dancer. The two women allegedly confronted each other publicly, creating a scandal that splashed across newspapers. Brynner, however, walked away calmly, completely unbothered. The New York Post dubbed him a shameless collector of affairs. Whispers circulated in Hollywood about his relationships with much younger actresses, stories that were rarely printed but widely known in elite circles. What shocked many in the industry was his blatant hypocrisy. After being diagnosed with lung cancer, Brynner became the face of a massive anti-smoking campaign in 1985, famously appearing in a posthumous television message saying, "Don't smoke like I did." But people who had worked with him told a different story. Crew members on the 10 Commandments remembered him chain-smoking backstage, sometimes lighting 3 cigarettes in a row before stepping in front of the cameras to lecture audiences about quitting. A makeup artist recalled he could fill the room with smoke, then walk out and deliver his anti-smoking lines with a straight face. Lee Marvin had little patience for what he saw as theatrical hypocrisy. In an interview with Variety, he famously remarked, "He doesn't act. He just waits for the spotlight to shine on his bald head." For Marvin, Brynner wasn't just an egotist. He was a man who manipulated both stage and public image for power. He played the hero to audiences, the king to directors, and the moralist to television viewers, while privately doing the opposite. Yul Brynner passed away in 1985, mourned by millions of fans around the world. His death marked the end of an era, closing a chapter of Hollywood that was as brilliant on the surface as it was ruthless and competitive behind the scenes. For those who knew him closely, Brynner embodied the darker side of fame, the relentless pursuit of the spotlight, even at the expense of truth, loyalty, and respect for others. Among the 7 names Lee Marvin exposed, few stirred as much unease within Hollywood circles as Charles Bronson. Known to the public as the stoic, tough-faced star of the Death Wish series, Bronson projected an image of unshakable strength, the ultimate man of action. But behind the scenes, he earned a reputation that would follow him throughout his career. He was considered the most unpleasant man in Hollywood. In fact, the Los Angeles Times, in an article published in 1980, bluntly gave him that very label. Lee Marvin didn't mince words either. In a 1971 interview with Variety, he famously remarked, "Working with Charles Bronson is like talking to a wall, but at least a wall stays quiet. He radiates an energy that suffocates the entire crew." Bronson's difficult personality extended into his personal life. In 1968, he married actress Jill Ireland, and the press initially celebrated them as Hollywood's iron couple. But the reality behind closed doors was far more troubling. Ireland confided years later to actor Michael Caine that Bronson was obsessively jealous, monitoring her phone calls and questioning every outing. Their neighbors in Bel Air frequently overheard shouting matches and the sound of objects being smashed during their heated arguments. Rumors even circulated that at a Beverly Hills party, Bronson slapped Ireland for simply smiling at another male colleague. Their marriage eventually disintegrated in a very public and bitter divorce the tabloids described as a battle scene worthy of one of Bronson's films. On film sets, Bronson's temper and cold demeanor made him a figure crews dreaded working with. During the filming of The Dirty Dozen in 1967, he reportedly threatened a lighting technician who had accidentally misaligned a spotlight. According to one crew member who spoke to The Hollywood Reporter, Bronson grabbed the man by the collar and growled, "The only light that's supposed to shine is on me, no one else." Incidents like these created a suffocating atmosphere on set, where cast and crew often tiptoed around him to avoid confrontation. Bronson's biases also became public. In 1974, during the filming of Breakout, he allegedly refused to act alongside a Mexican actor, declaring, "The audience comes to see me, not them." This comment, published by the New York Post, caused a wave of anger in the Latin community, but Bronson appeared completely unfazed, never issuing a public apology. Politically, Bronson also courted controversy. During the anti-war protests of the 1970s, while many in Hollywood leaned toward peace movements, Bronson made headlines by calling for an iron hand to restore order during a press conference in Chicago, a stance that alienated many of his more liberal colleagues. For Lee Marvin, a man who had actually experienced the horrors of war firsthand, Bronson's callousness was infuriating. While filming The Dirty Dozen, Marvin made repeated attempts to engage him in conversation, to break through the ice. But Bronson responded only with cold stares and eventually told him flatly, "I don't need friends here." From that moment, Marvin saw him not just as cold but soulless, and he criticized him openly for years afterward. Directors, too, echoed Marvin's sentiments. One director told CBS Evening News that Bronson didn't need to shout to dominate a set. He just sits still, and the entire crew feels choked by pressure. This chilling presence, combined with his volatile personal life, created an image of a man both admired for his screen presence and feared behind the camera. To Lee Marvin, Charles Bronson symbolized a dangerous shift in Hollywood, where brute image and intimidation replaced collaboration, warmth, and respect. While audiences cheered for his revenge-driven roles on screen, those who worked with him knew a very different man, cold, confrontational, and impossible to approach. Robert Mitchum was one of Hollywood's brightest stars in the late 1940s, a man whose rugged looks and rebellious attitude made him a post-war icon. But behind that magnetic screen presence lay a chaotic personal life, soaked in liquor and controversy, which ultimately earned him a place on Lee. Marvin's list of Hollywood's most ruthless figures. The defining moment of Mitchum's notoriety came on the night of September 1948. Los Angeles police raided 8443 Ridpath Drive, a villa tucked into Laurel Canyon infamous for its all-night parties. Inside, officers found Mitchum alongside actress Leela Leeds and two other men. The next morning, his arrest made front-page news across the country. The Los Angeles Times featured a now iconic photo of Mitchum being led away, head down, cigarette in hand. The scandal was explosive. At the time, Mitchum had just broken out as a leading man with his acclaimed performance in Out of the Past, 1947. He was expected to become America's new masculine ideal in the post-war era. His arrest for marijuana possession shattered that image. The New York Daily News called it the betrayal of a hero, while Time magazine wrote, "If Mitchum can fall, then Hollywood is no longer sacred." Mitchum was sentenced to 60 days in the Los Angeles County Jail, and photographs of him eating in the prison cafeteria became etched into the public consciousness. Although RKO Studios scrambled to portray him as the victim of a moral witch hunt, the stain on his reputation was permanent. This was, in many ways, Hollywood's first major modern scandal, exposing the chasm between the glamorous image on screen and the reckless reality behind closed doors. Mitchum's wild behavior didn't stop there. He was notorious for heavy drinking, often arriving on set intoxicated. During the filming of River of No Return, 1954, director Otto Preminger had to halt shooting repeatedly because Mitchum fell asleep on set. Colleagues said he could consume 2 bottles of whiskey before filming began. Variety in 1955 bluntly described him as an actor fueled more by alcohol than script. His careless attitude infuriated filmmakers. On Not as a Stranger, 1955, Mitchum clashed with director Stanley Kramer, mocking him as a moral teacher rather than a filmmaker. Lee Marvin, who treated acting with discipline and respect, was disgusted watching Mitchum treat the craft like a joke. Their conflict was public. Marvin openly labeled Mitchum as lazy and dismissive of audiences. Mitchum's off-screen remarks added fuel to his reputation. In a 1969 Esquire interview, he made derogatory comments toward minorities and mocked the civil rights movement. Although editors quickly altered parts of the interview before publication, the backlash had already begun. Many saw his views as outdated, insensitive, and inflammatory. Politically, Mitchum was equally polarizing. During the 1960s, as anti-war protests spread across the U.S., Mitchum publicly supported a hardline stance on Vietnam. At a 1967 Chicago press event, broadcast on CBS, he declared, "We must crush disorder with an iron hand." His words angered many of Hollywood's left-leaning artists, including Lee Marvin, who had experienced real combat firsthand and considered Mitchum's statements careless bravado. Mitchum's personal life was just as turbulent. His marriage to Dorothy Spence was long-lasting, but plagued by rumors of domestic unrest. Publications like Hollywood Confidential hinted at heated fights behind closed doors, though studios often worked hard to suppress these stories to protect his image. Publicly, he was painted as the charming rebel, but in reality, his life was ruled by alcohol, recklessness, and ego. For Lee Marvin, who lived by a code of discipline shaped on the battlefields of Saipan, Mitchum represented the opposite, a man who betrayed both his craft and the respect of his peers. Marvin's biting verdict was simple: a soldier never falls asleep in battle. An actor shouldn't fall asleep on set, but for Mitchum, it was routine. Despite his undeniable talent and enduring popularity with audiences, Robert Mitchum's legacy carried a stark contradiction. He was adored by fans, but within the industry, many, Marvin included, saw him as a reckless disruptor who squandered both his talent and the respect he could have earned. By the late 1960s, Hollywood was thriving on grand war epics, and one of the defining films of that era was The Dirty Dozen, 1967. But while audiences saw a masterpiece on screen, behind the scenes it became the stage for one of the most infamous personality clashes in Hollywood history, Lee Marvin versus Telly Savalas. From the very first day of shooting in England, Telly Savalas made his presence felt, not through his acting, but through his relentless vanity. He became notorious among the crew for his obsessive lighting demands. Every morning, nearly 40 minutes were lost adjusting lights, so that his bald head would shine perfectly under the camera. According to a 1967 report in The Hollywood Reporter, this routine irritated everyone on set, but was tolerated because of his growing popularity. Savalas also demanded camera angles that favored his face, even in scenes where other actors were meant to take center stage. When crew members reminded him of fairness and direction, he snapped, "Audiences pay to see me, not nobodies." His inflated ego extended far beyond filming. At London's Dorchester Hotel, where the cast and crew often stayed, Savalas threw elaborate parties and insisted that the staff refer to him as Mr. Kojak, even before the iconic television series Kojak existed. A waiter later told the Daily Mail, "He walked in like a king and expected all of us to play along." His arrogance wasn't limited to work. It also affected his personal life. In a 1974 Los Angeles Times interview, Savalas's ex-wife painted a striking picture of life with him, saying he controlled every aspect of their household, from the food they ate to the way their children greeted visitors. She bitterly remarked, "We didn't live like a family. We lived as unwilling spectators in his endless show." Tensions between Savalas and Lee Marvin came to a head during the filming of a crucial barracks. Seen in The Dirty Dozen, Savalas deliberately stepped into a camera position reserved for Marvin, effectively stealing the close-up. Marvin exploded in fury, storming off set and yelling, "This is a war film, not a contest for who shines the most." Production was halted, and security had to be placed on set to prevent a physical altercation between the two actors. But his ego wasn't limited to The Dirty Dozen. On his hit TV show Kojak, 1973, Savalas regularly pressured writers to rewrite scripts to give his character more heroic speeches and dramatic rescues. One writer told Variety he didn't care about story structure or character arcs. All he wanted was to make sure he looked impressive. Another infamous incident took place during the filming of Capricorn 1, 1978. When a young actor accidentally stood in the wrong position during a shot, Savalas reportedly barked, "You don't deserve to share the frame with me." The New York Post ran the story, and it caused public outrage, but Savalas brushed it off as media exaggeration. Lee Marvin, who had survived real combat and valued authenticity, found Savalas almost unbearable. In a CBS Evening News interview years later, Marvin admitted, "I fought real battles, faced real bullets, but rarely met someone who made me want to explode like Telly Savalas." He was so self-absorbed. He saw all of us as background to his spotlight. To Marvin, Savalas wasn't a serious actor. He was a peacock, strutting under the lights, relying on vanity rather than craft. His obsession with image over substance was the exact kind of Hollywood behavior Marvin despised. And so, Telly Savalas became the final name on Lee Marvin's secret list of 7 ruthless Hollywood figures. A list that peeled back the glamorous facade of Golden Age Hollywood to reveal a world of ego, manipulation, and hidden scandals.